Welcome to another Kingscrusher radio show. So this is Tuesdays 9:10, just after Holby City. Here we're going to be looking at the third part, checking interesting past encounters between Magnus Carlsen and Sergey Karjakin. So the game I'd like to start off with now is in 2009. This was in the Moscow Blitz Championship. Welcome to another Kingscrusher radio. Mute that. So the Moscow Blitz Championship has been, well, the World Blitz Championships has shown Magnus Carlsen to be one of the greatest, Blitz players in the world. But Sergey Karjakin not so bad either. Let's have a look at this one. So Magnus was playing white, rated at 2801. This is back in 2009, and Karjakin's rating here is 2723. So D4 for Magnus, and let's put on actually a Blitz just in case as well. Okay, so we have D5, classical on Karjakin, and he plays Slav defense. So I hope most of you kind of see the Slav defense as a kind of new, in a way, it's a kind of new Queen's Gambit decline. You're not hemming in this bishop, but often it is voluntarily hemmed in later, because sometimes it can come out on this diagonal later. We see knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, and here, quite a trendy move now. Instead of setting up the triangle, Sergey Karjakin plays a6. This is a very popular move, a6. So depriving white of this b5 square, which in a lot of variations can be useful. It also not only can be useful for that, but also maybe taking and holding on to the pawn. So in fact, a bit of caution for Magnus Carlsen here. a4, just in case black wants to try and hold on to a pawn. This will stop things like that. We see the triangle. Solid triangle. It is hemming in that bishop, of course, but this is quite well trodden territory. I know it looks a little bit strange to have all these pawns on light squares. You'd think, if this bishop was exchanged off, black would be weak on the dark squares. That's going to be sometimes a theme. But let's see, bishop g5. Quite often, this apparently is quite popular, but we have this one as well. It's a logical move. Breaking the pin, e3, and black marks that b4 square because white has actually weakened b4, so that b4 square is marked, even though it's losing a bit of time. Holding that b4 square now. Bishop e2, black castled, white castled, and now a further celebration of this square, knight a6. The knight can come to this square here. And in fact, after queen b3, exactly that, knight b4 now. So black seems to be, in quite a solid position here, except we do have this problem piece. It's a classic problem piece on c8. So if you come to the stream just now, so this was Magnus Carlsen playing white against Sergey Karjakin in the Moscow World Blitz Championship of 2009. 18th of November, in fact. So maybe it was pretty cold during the game. I don't know how the central heating was in the venue. Okay, but anyway, knight a2, just trying to exchange off that knight immediately, and Karjakin obliges, and we have queen takes a2. It's okay here, it seems. It's exerting some pressure on the center. It's not completely ridiculous. h6, the bishop drops back, b6, and as though maybe the bishop's going to come either like to this diagonal or just b7. In fact, it goes to b7, so holding up solidly this triangle. Rook fd1, and we see knight fd7, h3, rook c8. It's a solid start position for sure. C takes d5, e takes queen b1 coming to this diagonal. So is there going to be a battery on this diagonal? Or does the queen want to be in front of the bishop? In fact, here with the bishop on b7, this square could be very interesting, as this game continuation shows, in fact, that after bishop b4, queen f5 is played. So there's an idea of bishop d3 potentially. So keeping an eye on sensitive spots. Rook e8, bishop d3, and black plays now g6. In this position, you might think g6 is quite committal. Knight f8 actually has a snag to it, it seems. So this is actually, it seems knight f8 is less safe than g6 tactically. Let's have a quick look at this position. Queen g4 is dangerous, threatening this. And if here, knight e5 is dangerous. There's some dangerous things emerging in this position for black. Yeah, there's dangerous pressure here. This kind of position is almost like this would be like losing for black, for example, because we've also got this diagonal with that bishop there. So if the queen went here, bang. Yeah, there's some dangers here. So this move g6, it does seem sorry, in this position it seems important to play g6 and not knight f8. Another alternative might be knight f6, but okay, g6. And the queen does go here, so threatening both bishop takes here, and also this is interesting as well. But this move seems to cover both possibilities. Bishop f8. So, okay, don't think the sack's working very well here. We see knight e5. But here, with scrutiny on the pawn chain, it does seem as though f7 is vulnerable. If black does nothing here, I mean, let's just give black a nothing move, then knight takes f7 is going to be horrible. It's just going to wreck this pawn chain, and black's going to get mated, for example. So yeah, black has to defend against knight takes f7, and black does that by taking on e5. Bishop takes e5. And even here now, bishop takes g6 is immediately threatened. So the pressure's not off just yet. Sergey has to defend a bit longer. Bishop g7, he's dissipating the pressure on his king. But f4, very interesting decision. Black dare not try and trap this bishop. That looks fatal to lose g6 here. He played actually c5. If black tries to munch this bishop, this looks absolutely disastrous for black. This kind of position would look completely disastrous. With the f-file and the bishop and queen, it doesn't matter that black's a piece up. Black, I think, is virtually on his last legs here in this kind of situation with the f-file coming in. That can't be entertained at all, this position. So, yeah, this has to be ignored, this idea of trapping the bishop. But instead, Sergey fights for central control a bit with the move c5. But yeah, there's more being thrown at the black king here now. f5. And a slight concession though. I mean, it is weakening a bit the dark squares. Black pounces on g5 in particular to try and also dissipate further pressure. So is the worst over now? Well, he is getting double pawns. Queen takes g5. There is a slight concession, and the bishop's a bit pushed back after f6. Yeah, this isn't all rosy, this position. Although you might think this is a bit double-edged, this pawn. Could it be weak later, this pawn on f6? We see now king f2. The king is preparing for the endgame. Maybe, you know, to come to the center, or to go and chase this pawn is another possibility. Rook e6. Bishop e2, threatening bishop g4 to skewer the rooks. That gets out the way. Bishop g4 anyway, rook c6. Now with imminent pressure on f6, we have bishop f3 trying to target d5. So the idea of d takes c5 is now on the cards, to just put some exposure on d5. That rook drops back, defending d5 indirectly. And now king g3, as though king g4 really is on the cards at some point. Potentially. As one idea. Bishop d6. Magnus takes this, and now does counter pressure on d5. Takes. And it looks as though, yeah, isn't f6 a little bit weak, but now, of course, d5 is targeted. We see e4. Now, what can black actually do here? He doesn't want to play the move d4, that's for sure, isn't it? Black actually, although technically it might actually be one of the better moves, it looks horrendous. Rook takes f6 was played, but if d4, e5, this looks like terrible because white's achieved protecting the pawn and a nice pawn wedge. But this might not be entirely terrible, this position here, hitting the rook. But yeah, white's better. In fact, white's got rook takes d4. White can be potentially better in this rook and pawn ending. But no, instead actually rook takes f6 was played, swapping, you know, losing a center pawn basically for white's flank pawn. But you'll notice that these pawns are kind of fragmented here, and of course we've got the double pawns. So in terms of pawn weaknesses, it seems white has the more solid pawn structure here. I think you would agree with that, wouldn't you? If I asked that question just to see who's awake, would you say white is better here? I mean, I would argue, I don't want to bias the vote, but I would argue that white's pawn structure is more solid on both sides of the board. But would you agree white is better here, or does any of you think black's better? No, black is in a passive state. I don't see how anyone can say that black's better. But go ahead if you want on stream. You know, I'll give you a few seconds to think about this position. This looks like a bad endgame for black, but is it enough for black to lose? Okay, we see a blockade. Rook d6 set up. Rook c3, as though there's going to be potentially just doubling on c5. That's an easy target to start off with, and it's connected with a5 later. f5, yep, here. Dropping d5 for c5, but it's connected, as I mentioned, with a5. But hold on a sec, there's another option here which is important. Maybe black shouldn't take this pawn. Maybe like a blitz game, he was distracted with white doubling rooks. Perhaps black does best here to wait until white commits to rook takes c5. He didn't. Perhaps rook cd8 is best. For example, rook takes and then take on d5. Okay, we lose a5 and white's better though. A bit. But no, in the game, black, without waiting for white to commit to rook takes c5, played actually in this position. It's only a blitz game, but I think it was with increment though. The standard blitz championships are with increment, but bishop takes d5 was played, and there's a small flaw about this bishop takes d5. Can you see what white can play here? White play, and I'm sorry I haven't asked you too many questions yet. I want to get you guys involved on stream and everywhere. It's better to get involved directly to get the patterns, to get some intimacy with the game. So what would you say here? White play, what would you play in this position? And I will give 20 seconds because there's a stream delay. Yeah, black, unfortunately, you know that expression pin and win. Yeah, quite often pins in Blitz chess, apparently even in Super GM Blitz chess, pins are pretty, can promise big advantages. Here, Black has unfortunately enabled a major pin. Now either Rook D1 or Rook D3, but Rook D3 was chosen, so it's a horrible pin Black's being lured into. So this looks like a blunder. Yeah, he's losing the exchange basically. Check. Black can't really defend this. If he tries to defend, we just build the pressure, and yeah, it's losing material. So bishop takes f3. Yeah, it's a blitz game though. Okay, he blundered the exchange. It's for at the moment it's for one pawn. Okay, so not totally over yet, just nearly over against Magnus Carlsen. Rook d7, cutting the king off. Rook b8, dropping c5 for b2. We have that transaction. King goes to e1 here, and white is actually threatening this mate in 1, so black can't really grab this pawn. Goes back to defend the mate in 1. That's another good thing about rook on the 7th. It is supporting mating nets quite often. And rook takes g5, so just the exchange down. Yes, it's grim. Defending a5 with that move, but a5 is still a target, and it's taken now. Okay, so some technical issues to resolve here. This trapped rook. Isn't the rook going to be munched? Does it matter? Does it make this matter? Mind losing the exchange back? Not really. He can get another pawn potentially. An important pawn here. Rook takes f5. Even though he's dropping a4, this one's going to drop off, and the king's still cut off. So this is dropping off, leaving 2 connected passed pawns soon. Rook b3. In fact, black didn't want to take that pawn just yet, but it's marching, and it's kind of a technique position, just 2 pawns up. So now finally taking, dropping a5. It's just 2 connected passed pawns. There's nothing too difficult about converting this, it would seem. Okay, you've got to avoid the mate in 1 tricks. It's a blitz game, but yeah. Check. Now to bring this pawn forward, rook d7 here. Now in this position, if king f5 was played, then rook g7, and then we're going to have g6. The pawns are going forward, whatever. King f4 was chosen. We have g6, threatening things like g7. It's over. Move 70. Sergey Karjakin resigned. So back then in 2009, it seems Magnus Carlsen had the edge maybe in Blitz, well, by the evidence of this game. So in this game, just to recap, so it seems to be a solid Slav defense. Black grabbed that b4 square early on. Magnus swapped off his c3 knight for that knight. Later, where did black go wrong exactly in this game? What was particularly interesting was Magnus going queen f5, setting up some dangerous pressure on black's king side, and it did lead to one small compromise of the doubled pawns, if you remember, and then the bishop being a bit squished. And in black trying to get f6, he lost the center pawn, and then there was also the weak c5 and a5 pawns. It seems it just evolved into pawn weaknesses later on for black, which led to a big endgame advantage. Okay, so I hope you got something from that. Let's go on to another game. So quite a high class blitz game, I think. This is another blitz encounter now from the World Blitz Championship, again of 2009. So Sergey Karjakin playing white, against Magnus Carlsen. We have e4, the sharp e4, c5, but not so sharp g3 now. This is probably a way down move book in live book. It's way down, 3, 4, 5, 8th most popular to play g3 here. It seems a bit odd not to control, because usually if you want to play a closer cylinder you try and control d5. But here, although d5 is popular, it wasn't actually played. We see g6. White now is putting some pressure on d5. Knight e2. c3. Magnus just plays knight f6 here. d4. Both sides castle. Knight c6. h3. We see e5. Trying to encourage white maybe to close the position with d5. Black would have a great time sometimes when this happens, because then you can play like this and maybe like play for f5 later as if you're playing a King's Indian defense. No, white keeps the tension in the center here with bishop e3 and putting pressure on c5. So he is actually threatening to take and then take again. So what does black want to do? Does black want to bolster this with c5? He didn't actually. It might be an option, but he didn't. I don't think there's anything too bad with that. But he played actually c takes d4. Magnus Carlsen played c takes d4. C takes d4. And it seems as though this might be possible to play d5 just to try and clear the center. But actually, okay, e takes d4 was played. Knight takes d4. And in a way, this seems like a dynamic decision by Magnus Carlsen. He's kind of giving himself potentially weak pawn on d6, backward pawn. But here, knight e5, the piece pressure is quite good. Black has got potentially d5 here, or knight c4. Both of these are interesting ideas. One to dissolve that, and this just to harass this bishop on e3. And it's not entirely easy to parry both ideas here. If you play like knight d2, then maybe d5 is possible, or there might be some other stuff. I mean, d5, no, not in this position, because f4 might be okay. Okay, but this position, but perhaps this is a good move actually. Knight d2, it might be one of the better moves just to parry this knight c4. Perhaps a little bit controversially, knight c4 was ignored. Actually, well, it is just the Blitz game, so can't think of everything. Yeah, if we just to rule this out, d5 here doesn't work because f4, it seems. And then what? We're going to play e5, and we're going to have a fantastic position. This position is just very, very nice for white, to be avoided for black. Isolate pawn. So actually, yeah, the key thing is this knight c4, and it wasn't addressed. If you do consider this a threat, it just wasn't addressed. Knight c3 just allows knight c4 here, which is played. Knight c4, and it looks as though, okay, no big deal, we're just temporarily inconvenienced the bishop. We're just going to drop the bishop back and play b3, right? Is that it? Is that it? All that's going to happen? We're just going to drop the bishop back and kick that pesky knight back. Well, maybe Sergey thought that. You know, bishop c1 was played. But there's a trail of a few weaknesses of the last moves here. With this plan, actually. With this whole plan. This has just weakened d4. b3 is potentially going to weaken the diagonal. So in trying to kick this pesky knight back, there's some very short-termish weaknesses to try and tap into, actually. And we see queen b6 now, looking at that knight. And of course now, this looks as though black has got knight takes e4 now on the cards. All of a sudden, even though black's got this weak pawn, it's like white is under fierce pressure already in this position. What is he going to do? Can he afford to play b3, in fact. I don't want to bias things actually the way I'm describing this actually, because it might be that b3 is a perfectly okay move in this position, and in fact it is actually played. b3 is actually played. So it looks as though, hold on a sec, isn't there this tactic on d4? And Magnus does play this tactic just to hit d4. Is this a disaster or something? Knight takes e4. Queen takes d4. And looking at the rook now. Queen takes d4. Bishop takes d4. And this is an interesting position, actually. Do we just move the rook? Remember, this knight's attacked as well. For some reason, actually, engines like white here. Engines like white here. Not with rook b1 though. Not much with rook b1. In fact, it seems bishop h6 would have been okay for white. If we have a quick look at this position with bishop h6, if we take here, then rook takes a1, and black doesn't want to lose two pieces. So say knight goes back. There's a tactic in this position which is really strong. Can you see? White to play. This is an engine line which was probably missed, but it kind of refutes all Magnus Carlsen's play this line. It's quite funny. Just to see it now, because I wasn't 100% sure, but there's a tactic here which is just 1-0. This is just a line which shows black's play might not have been correct. In if you want to treat chess as a science, black's play, which over the board and definitely not blitz, is not a science. But white's play here has a winning move in this position. Can you see? Yeah. Instead of taking the rook, that would just be about equal. Well, maybe a small advantage for white. We've actually got knight f6 check here, kicking the king away from the rook. And that's just white's winning. So this whole concept actually is not brilliant for black, but white didn't play the optimal move here. White didn't play this, and if he moves the rook, then we're just gonna win material. Rook 81, but we've got two pieces hanging. Okay, so maybe a bit lucky for Magnus. He played rook b1 instead. Now, if the knight moves, this wasn't played, then again, this is good for white. Knight takes d6, for example, is good for white. No, Magnus instead counterattacks here with d5. This is one of the better moves now, d5, to counterattack white's knight. Yeah, things have really sharpened up here, because this bishop's trying to protect this pawn. So white is in a little tricky position. If white takes on c4, d takes, then we can't like recapture here, because bishop takes h3 is not that great for white. It's not nice. So this is a tricky position now. Rook d1 was played. D takes e4. Rook takes d4. Knight e5. And now also there's this skewer here. So rook takes e4 isn't appetizing. It wasn't played, funny enough, because of bishop f5 skewer. And also this isn't appetizing either, it would seem, because of bishop takes h3. But okay, white actually plays bishop h6. We have rook e8. And there's a very naughty move here coming up, which white goes straight into a tactical disaster actually in this position, it seems. White should be okay with, you know, he's not he's okay, he's a pawn down, right? He's a pawn down, but a move like rook c1, apparently it, you know, it isn't that bad because the rook's threatening things maybe later to infiltrate. But unfortunately, white played here. It looks to be a bit of a mistake. Bishop takes e4. Can you see why this is actually a mistake? This is actually a mistake. Bishop takes e4 for tactical reasons. Black to play here. Can you see what black can do here, which really questions the light squares in particular? A resourceful move which exploits some of the weak light squares in the position. So Magnus found this move. Magnus playing black plays quite a crushing move. It's the top engine move Magnus plays here. It's a tactically crushing move. Yeah, this game was from 2009. It's a Blitz encounter, historical Blitz encounter. Black to play here. What does black play? Yeah, there's a strong move because f3 is weak. This f3 is actually, can you imagine this fork? Magnus's move bishop f5. Yeah, bishop f5. This is horrible because king h1 was played here. If takes, we've got knight f3 check, winning the exchange. And if we drop the bishop back, we're going to lose the rook. And you know, if we support this bishop, again, there's going to be a fork after bishop takes. There's going to be an almighty fork here. Yeah, it's difficult to meet. So white plays king f1 here. Maybe king h1 is not, king h1 actually is not too hot in this position at all. After rook a8, because we've got this check here coming up. If this rook is lured away, we've got the check, and we're just like winning material. So actually, maybe that explains why king f1. Sorry. Oh, Muppets. No. It explains why king f1 is the top engine move. Pardon me. King f1 should have been played here, and the reason is, I've just given it away, is yeah, this is this position. Okay, it drops h3, but it's, you know, not as bad. No, in the game we see king h1. So the rook is kind of overloaded. So another crushing move from Magnus, rook a8, trying to distract the rook away from e4. It's over because we can't protect the rook. This is really crushing blows from Magnus all the time. We can't protect the rook because bishop takes e4 check is winning the rook over here. You know, what can we do here after rook a8? This intermediate check is a disaster. Rook takes d8, we got bishop takes e4 check. Bishop takes f5 just loses the exchange. There's nothing to do here. This is gone for white. If you look at this position, it's just tactically gone. This position here with the king, very unfortunately in the checking line, is what can you see that white can do here? He desperately just tries rook a4, but now black just plays. This is the final move of the game. Black to play. Yeah, Magnus was tactically vicious in this game on the light squares. Really vicious. Blow after blow. Black to play here. The final crushing move is what? Can you see there's a crushing move here? Are you all agreed on it? What do you want to play here? Final move of the game, 200 points at stake. Virtual points. No, you can't cash it for cash. Black to play, plays, yeah, b5, just b5 in this position. Just trying to lure the rook away from e4. That's it. You know, if the rook moves, bishop takes e4 check. I'm not sure about knight f3 check. That's quite good for. Sorry, knight f3. Sorry, it's not check. Knight f3 is no good here. Sorry, someone mentioned knight f3. No, in this position, white can just take on f5 and take on a7. That's better for white. No, the move here is just b5. Just lure the rook away from e4. That was sparkling actually. When I was playing through this game earlier, I wasn't quite sure, but now looking at it again, the clarity of Black's tactical play, I think was quite sparkling on the light squares. And ironically, it seems White had missed the tactic on the dark squares. That's the beautiful irony of chess, that if White had played correctly, he could have refuted this on the dark squares earlier with that bishop h6 and knight f6 check idea. But no, it's Black that gets White on the light squares. And it's logical. It's logical. Underneath that, you know, when you fianchetto on both sides, White's weakening the light squares, Black's weakening the dark squares. You'd expect the opportunities to be around those areas of weakness, wouldn't you? Intuitively. But Magnus is really quick to strike on this opportunity of the light squares with moves like bishop f5, you know, trying to get this knight f3 check in. And then later, you know, rook d8. Yeah, it's fell to bits quite quickly. So this is one of their quicker blitz. Well, this is one of their quickest decisive games actually. But it was just a blitz game, so let's not go crazy about it too much. Okay, let's look at another game. Now this is in the Amber Rapid tournament of 2009. So 24th of March 2009. So Rapid, I think with an increment. So Magnus playing white, d4. We have d5, another discussion about the Slav defense. Knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, the triangle setup. Bishop g5. This is the most popular move, h6, just to kick that bishop immediately. White gives up the dark square bishop. This is well-trodden territory. Well trodden theoretically, this sequence here, including g6, the bishop fianchettoing here, and you might wonder, hold on, why just while we're here, why does the bishop, it can't really go here in this position because we've got, you know, things like this potentially. Eventually when white castles, white's threatening knight e4, so the bishop wants to be away from that sort of square, and here is not particularly great either. So yeah, usually g6 is played here. And that implies actually, if the bishop is coming to this diagonal, c5 later might be logical to try and blast that in the diagonal. Castling, bishop g7. e4. This is well trodden territory still. e5. d5. We see knight b6. Bishop drops back. Bishop g4. Yeah, white is going to be accepting double pawns, it seems. But for that, white is going to maintain a strong grip on the d5 square. So he's going to accept a concession in his pawn structure here to try and keep a grip on d5. Rook c1. Black castles. And now h3. Basically encouraging black to inflict the double pawns. But this position, there's been still quite a few games from here. Okay, let's have a look at this position. Do you think who's better, white or black? I mean, I think there's some swings and roundabouts here, some pros and cons. But anyway, if I met this is at move 17, who do you think's better then? If I said just to see how much you evaluate double pawns or not. Do you think white's better or black, or is it about equal? What would you say here? About equal. Okay. All right. We see rook fd8. And white reinforces that d5 square. So it seems this is like the center of attention here in this position. Bishop f6. As though the bishop might be coming out on this diagonal. D takes. One pair of rooks comes off. This is potentially weak pawn, right? Knight d1. And because the bishop's protecting the knight, this is actually threatened now. Rook takes c6. So that's actually humbly protected with rook d6 now. But this is a fragmented pawn chain. We see rook c5 putting pressure on e5 and also preparing to hit a7. King f8, king f1, h5. Knight comes to e3. The kings come to the center mutually, they come to the center. Bishop drops back. For the moment, actually, rook a5 isn't entertained here. It's kept for one move longer. Knight c2, with the idea maybe knight b4 is interesting to hit c6 like this. And black responds here with bishop h6, looking at d2. So is knight b4 on the cards given rook d2? If knight b4, this position is actually, even this position is okay for white. But Magnus chose actually rook. He chose to shield his b2 pawn actually, just with rook a5 hitting a7, and he's got the shield set up on b2. So it seems a little bit pointless to play this check here. But he plays rook d7. The thing is, in doing this, there's a weakness of the last move. e5. e5's been neglected. And given e5 is unprise here, this actually technically might be one of the better sequences, this position. It's, yeah, okay. I'm not going into the reasons why. They're probably too subtle actually. No, forget that. Scrap that. The thing is, e5 has been neglected. e5 has been neglected here. And it's difficult to actually defend both pawns. Why on earth has black just dropped a pawn? Okay, it's got to be answered. I know there's an undertone of opposite coloured bishops here. But let's just rewind that before we get into this. Why neglect a pawn? This might have been a mistake already, just to neglect the pawn. But the thing is, this was critical for black. Black had to address b4, knight b4. This pawn is actually first target, and that caused this bishop h6 to try and coordinate some pressure against white. If black doesn't play this way, then I think he's just getting run over. I mean, what does he do about knight b4? What does black do about knight b4 anyway? If you could try kicking the rook, but then it's going to lose a7 potentially. This position here, knight e3 might even be stronger than rook takes a7. So yeah, black seems to be in a meltdown. His pawns actually are in a meltdown scenario in any case. So it was kind of bad. Okay, so let's just go back to this. So rook a5, yeah. Rook goes back, dropping e5. But it is opposite coloured bishops. So it's not the end of the world just yet. Bishop g7, and the bishop's actually looking at b2 anyway. How does white defend b2? So he's going to get a pawn back anyway. It doesn't seem such a huge deal losing that e5, because it's kind of liberated the bishop anyway along the diagonal, revealing b2 as something that's going to drop off. Nevertheless, this is a problem for black, this position. Although he might be getting his pawn back, white has emerged with something he didn't have before. A massive rolling centre after f4. This is dangerous. This centre. Bishop takes b2. e5 check. Now knight b4. The c6 pawn is still weak. Okay, and in this position actually, how does black actually defend c6? If rook c7. We've got a nice tactic in this position. This wasn't played, rook c7. King f8 was played. But can you see that white's got a nice tactic here in this variation? White's play here. Can you see there's a nice tactical idea? What does white play in this position? This is just a variation in the game. Rook c7 wasn't attempted. Rook takes a7 is possible here. Netting a pawn, an important pawn. Yeah. Because then we've got a nice outside pass pawn, and they're very difficult to meet. And the king's over there, it's like miles away. So yeah, rook c7 wasn't attempted. We see king f8 instead. Yeah, it does lose c6. So black's again a pawn down. Bishop c1, trying to hit these pawns. That's protected. Rook c7. That's protected and hitting the bishop. That's moved. Rook c2, away from the dark squares. On the light squares now, all the pieces. So white is a pawn up again. King e4, and more aggressive king. He's got the trump cards in this ending, it seems. King g7. And now a very interesting tactic is played by Magnus. Maybe it wasn't entirely needed. Maybe white just plays knight d8 and with pressure on f7. That's quite fun to play. But he actually played a very interesting tactic in bishop takes f7. And we get a change of imbalances. This pawn becomes more dangerous as a passed pawn, of course, with this tactic. Now, in handling this, king takes f7 was played. If rook takes, then knight d8 hits c8 and f7. That's a worse version of the game. So in the game we see king takes f7, check, and black gets 2 pieces for the rook. But these pawns are a bit of a menace here. Interestingly, one's first thought might be to just go for g6 like this, but if we do this, then maybe, you know, black's a bit resistant with knight e7. In fact, Magnus chose rook c3, and now check, keeping the rook just here instead of going for this pawn. In fact, this pawn is dissolved with f5, leaving white potentially with 2 connected passed pawns, basically. G takes, king takes. We've got 2 connected passed pawns. And it's very difficult to defend this for black. White is 2 pawns up as well, more aggressive king. And the pawns seem to be rolling here. A5, f4, knight b6. The rook comes to kick the king back, potentially. Knight d5. We see a3, kicking the bishop first before rook g7 check. Interesting little finesse there. Rook g7 is good anyway, but kicking the bishop first. Rook d3, not even bothering rook g7 there, kicking the knight. Because now e6, with the idea of rook d7 check, these pawns are rolling forward relentlessly. Check. Rook d4. So the king is freer to move, not worrying how this pawn's protected and this knight's tied down. King e7, king e5. Okay, goes this way, supporting f5 potentially, as well as rook d7 check. Knight b5, dropping a4. This looks grim. Check. King d5. Check. King c4. Yeah, 3 pawns up. Pinning the knight now. Keeping the pawns protected now. Check. Yeah, it looks all over. Check. Now the outside passed pawn. Yeah, the pieces are not going to do much against this outside passed pawn. Knight c7, rook d7. Now here after e7, black either ran out of time or just resigned here. It does seem crushing, in fact, because white's next move probably resigned because rook d8's on the cards here, just going to get one of the pieces. So black resigned on move 62 here. Okay, so it seems, although this is an interesting game, it's quite trendy, the opening sequence. Although white did seem to suffer the double pawns, he had a strong grip on d5, and he uses that to play d takes to weaken black's pawn structure. And the probing moves around the isolated pawns were quite instructive. But with c6 under fire, black ends up dropping e5, and although it opened up this diagonal and black got his pawn back, then the center was rolling in white's favor and white had a more aggressive king. So it seems the whole endgame was set up then in white's favor, as a consequence of black trying to restore material equality in this game. So that was a fascinating rapid game encounter. Yeah, it seems in a lot of these games, you know, a slightly weaker pawn structure can prove fatal when you're playing Magnus Carlsen. Slightly weaker pawn structure, yeah, it can be really dangerous. Okay, we've checked out 3 games there. Now there was potentially a 4th game. I'm not entirely sure. We covered this last week. It was in 2008. I wanted to keep it in slightly chronological order. Does anyone remember? If I asked, we could go over this. I'm not entirely sure we covered this. Does anyone remember an Alapin defense from last week? Or should we just do a recap of it anyway, just to make sure we've covered it? There was in the Amber Tournament Rapid of 2008 an Alapin defense, which I'm not entirely sure we covered last week. Does anyone remember it? Or should we have a... should we reserve it for next week? Okay, I'll ask. Do you want one more game? Just potential recap game, or should we just leave it for next week? So that's the question on stream now. So we're about an hour in. Do you want one more game? It's a potential recap game, I'm afraid. I'm not entirely sure we've gone over this. Okay. Does anyone remember an Alapin defense game? Okay, let's go for it. So this is in the Amber Tournament of 2008. Yeah, I just want to make sure we're going through historically. Yeah. So Sergey Karjakin was playing white against Magnus in the Amber Tournament Rapid. Played in Nice, France, 17th of March 2008. So we have e4 from Sergey, and we have Magnus playing the Alapin defense, quite provocative. Yeah, provocative. So e5, knight d5, d4, d6, knight f3. We see d takes e5 here. Quite often bishop g4 is played here as well. D takes e5 though is chosen. Knight takes c6. This is well trodden. Bishop e2. This is the main move actually. I think on d3 it might be a little target sometimes. Anyway, it's kept on e2. This is the main move, it seems. Bishop e2. Knight d7. So Magnus Carlsen playing white. Magnus Carlsen playing black. The Alapin defense. Knight d7. Knight f3. Knight 7 to f6. Sergey castles. Bishop g4. Now white attempts, well, black to take. He does. e6. So white's got the bishop pair, and it seems action in the center for the moment. c4, knight b6, protecting the c4 pawn now. Bishop e7, bishop b2, keeping a bind, it seems, on e5 at least. Knight d2. We see a5. Okay, so black might be positionally threatening a4. This kind of in advance is dealt with a3. If a4 here, I think we can just play b4 now quite comfortably. So we see queen c7, queen e2. So at move 16, who do you think's better here? White or black? If I ask that question here, out of this Alapin defense, white or black better? What do you think about this position? So Magnus Carlsen is playing black. He's played this Alapin defense. White seems to have the bishop pair. Black might be playing for c5, it would seem, but doesn't that open the diagonal? So who do you think is better in this position, not to bias anything? Yeah, I mean, I think white's... Personally, I like white here. Okay. He's got the bishop pair, right? As I mentioned, if black ever tries c5 here, I don't think this is particularly good. White could actually just take this and even play a move like... I mean, this looks uncomfortable for black. It just looks uncomfortable for black. Anyway, he plays rook fe8. We see g3. Rook 88, and the king, the bishop, pardon me, the bishop comes to G2, knight BD7, knight F3, Queen B6. This seems okay, a little inconvenience for white, just addressing this. Okay, but the queen just comes to protect that. Knight F8. So the knight's maybe coming over here. Knight E5. Knight G6. And white kind of keeps the tension going in the position. He doesn't want to exchange on G6. Sergey actually keeps more tension. This might be interesting, but he plays knight D3, keeping more pieces on the board, and with an eye on both these key squares. We see now the move H5, actually, maybe trying to weaken white on the dark squares a little bit, as though H4 is on the cards. That's ignored actually here. Rook AD1. H4 might be an interesting move to try, consider, but actually quick Queen C7 was played first. And now actually, interestingly, we see F4. Is white creating some dark square weaknesses? If black tries though H4 here, then G4 would seem okay for white. So, okay, F4, yeah, bishop D6 was played. But now knight E5, immediately threatening to win a pawn. Knight takes, and then taking on G6. So this knight actually retreats. It doesn't want to take here because that will just, well, loses a piece and it loses the game. So no, the knight retreats. So white's got this double fianchetto position with a nicely entrenched knight on E5. And in fact, now plays C5, forcing the issue, forcing black to give up this, but losing control of D5. Bishop takes E5, F takes, and black uses that D5 square. But this pawn is slightly vulnerable, right? It's hit with Queen E2. And okay, what does black do about this? He didn't play this G6. This doesn't, I'm not sure this is, it's further commitment of weaknesses. No, in fact, Magnus countered with knight F5 looking at G3. So if white takes, then we play knight takes G3. That's protected. So again, we've got this on the cards. We see H4. Now here, G4 is not so hot because of knight G3 winning the exchange. So that's to be avoided. In fact, so G takes H4 is played. And it looks as though we've got potential G-file or potentially F-file pressure here, building up against the black king. B6. We see bishop E4, yeah, threatening that knight on F5 now. It doesn't really want to take on H4 here. This would seem to be far too dangerous, because then we've got moves like Queen H5. Yeah, looking at H7, that doesn't look too healthy. So after this move, in fact, black just took on C5, trying to undermine white's center a bit. That's probably one of the better moves. D takes C5. Now Queen E7 was played. So looking to take this pawn under better conditions. Bishop takes F5. Though white's winning this this one. It seems to be crashing through that F file. Queen takes H4. And there's actually a threat here. Black is actually threatening knight F4. winning the exchange. This is parried with bishop c1, holding that f4 square, but also bishop g5 is threatened as well. And this looks really awkward for Magnus. This next move looks awkward to play this queen h7, just getting out of the way. If he moves like the rook, this is still nice for white. Maybe the queen's kicked. It's still kind of, yeah, it's interesting for white. Can try and hold the center and set up threats. But okay, so queen h7 though was played, and now this doubling the rooks on f7. Probably this is a mistake. This next move from Magnus. Maybe it seems just simply rook d7, and black might be fine here. Might be absolutely fine in this position. For example, I mean, what is white actually doing? What is he doing? Is he threatening e6 under some circumstance? Maybe, but black might have something like this. So if e6, yeah, this is okay. This is not terminal with g6 being played. Anyway, it's not terminal. Although it's pretty dangerous. Okay, no, but instead, okay, this is kind of scary. This e6 tactical idea to land rook f8. But it seems okay. Against this, there might be some other defenses, notably actually knight c7. Okay, but here, okay, after rook d f3, in fact, knight c3 was played, hitting the queen. But now we've got queen c4, threatening, yeah, all sorts. Queen takes and the knight. Check. And this isn't so clever here with queen takes f7 being threatened. So that's addressed with queen g6. But yeah, there might have been a better way to defend f7 here, in the form of knight d5. This might have been the best chance to allow this position. This might have been a better chance. Now in the game, remember this is a rapid game anyway, queen g6 was played, but this allows a strong forcing move in this position. Which is pretty terminal for black. White's play here is pretty terminal for black. This next move, although black is threatening, it seems black. Sorry, after playing queen g6, he's threatening subtly a mate in one, and it seems, you know, defending that seems a great idea. But unfortunately, white plays what here? White's got a really strong move in this position after queen g6. Can you see? Yeah, just anyone see? It's rook g5. Although it's inviting the queen to have this seemingly dangerous check as well. The points here, if queen e6 trying to shield f7, white just takes this knight and protects his bishop, and black doesn't seem to have anything here, just a piece down. But so in the game we see queen c2 check, But unfortunately here, white has rook g2. And white's still threatening queen takes f7 and queen g7 mating. So black has no time to take on c1 here. Karjakin has out-tacticked Magnus Carlsen, it seems, in this rapid game. Black has to resign here. If queen takes, yeah, we just got a mate in 2. Bang, bang. Yeah. These pressure points have proven fatal. But, yeah, this is it. There's nothing for black to do in this position. Queen sack doesn't do anything. Yeah, there's no way out here. Magnus had to resign this position. Yeah, it got tactical very quickly. Okay, to recap on this game though, a little bit of provocative opening the Alapin defense. White did seem to end up with a nice position with the bishop here, and forced the issue later, giving up. You have to sometimes give up something to get something. He gave up the d5 square, but he got dynamic pressure on black's king side. In particular, h5 was a weak pawn, and it seemed later both f7 and g7 under great pressure. And Magnus tried for something to counterattack, but rook g5 was just a refutation of queen g6. So yeah, it was out-tacticked there by Sergey. If we go back to the critical position here, around about here, yeah, knight d5 seems possible. This is a lesser evil continuation. Just giving up f7, and black can still play on a little bit. But yeah, this immediate queen g6 is just refuted. Maybe underestimating this maneuver, hitting the queen again, and we've still got the f7 issue. This was just refuted with rook g5. Yeah, so they have some very interesting encounters. So we'll be going past 2009 next time. So I hope you got something from these games. I think they have some interesting points to them. If you've got any other questions about the games, you can put them on YouTube. This will be on YouTube soon. So I hope you enjoyed this week, and have a good week until next week. Okay, remember to like the video if you liked any bits of the video. So likes are always appreciated. So until next week, okay, thanks very much. Thanks for coming. See you next week.